2026 NFL Draft Combine has wrapped up for the weekend. Wanted to do a quick run through of specifically offensive players who stood out from the week, whether that was reaffirming something we were looking for them to, whether that was showing us something we did not expect, whether that was boosting their stock in the media, and projecting if that could be boosting their stock as far as NFL team circles. Starting with quarterback, how do you not start with Taylor Green, quarterback out of Arkansas? Yes, did we know that he had serious speed and the longest strides of the class? Yes. Don't know that we knew he had 4.37 speed and a combine record 43.5-inch vertical. I mean, for further perspective, he got that record by 3 inches. Otherworldly, there were some conversations about would he be interested in running some receiver drills. He immediately shut that down, as we probably would have expected. I think he definitely threw himself in that QB3, QB4 mix, set a floor as far as QB5. He's going to be in that conversation with the next guy we're going to discuss in North Dakota State, quarterback Cole Payton, Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU, and so on and so forth. Great effort out of Green, transitioning, like I said, to Cole Payton out of North Dakota State. For him to come in and turn in, a 9.97 RAS compared to Taylor Green's 9.99, don't be overshadowed there. Anytime you see a quarterback, and I say anytime, it being on one hand, anytime you see them go have a 40-inch vertical, he ran in the 4.5s, showed that zip in the throwing portion. Peyton has put himself in the QB3 conversation, in my opinion. There's been some buzz league circles could be higher than even in media, and I'm drinking that Kool-Aid. The elongated throwing motion is just going to be that a quarterback coach has to imagine that they can fix, but somebody's going to. And at 6'2", 230, all of this was that much more impressive with his athletic size. And lastly, as far as the quarterbacks, I'd throw the surprise in there. Got to give a shout out to Baylor quarterback Sawyer Robertson. I mean, that's my go back and watch the tape. I did not understand or imagine that this guy had 9.8, 98th percentile relative athletic score coming into the week. Somebody that had a good solid Senior Bowl week, but I had no idea he was this kind of athlete. That I can say something. League didn't imagine that either. That's going to probably be the most stock up guy with that. And in terms of just the throwing portion, two other names I'd throw out there. It was really positive to see Drew Aller out of Penn State go have a good throwing portion, and the deeper it went into it, really opening it up. You could see he was getting a lot more comfort using his lower body, letting it rip. His fastball can make a lot of guys out there look like changeups. And then lastly, I'd mention, somebody that particularly coming into this process, I probably wasn't as high on, but had a nice Senior Bowl, some good buzz out of there, and I thought might have had the best throwing portion was Illinois' Luke Altmaier. Doesn't have a ton of physical traits, but in terms of somebody you can project to just be a good NFL backup for a number of years, I thought Altmaier did well for himself. At running backs, mentioning some Razorbacks again, and you have to start with Mike Washington Jr. out of Arkansas. I came into this event with Washington as my running back too, and some people might roll their eyes at that like, no, you didn't. Yes, I did. I was that impressed with what I went into the Senior Bowl with tape-wise and his production, but really just seeing him in person up close at the Senior Bowl with the acceleration and the burst he had in the short area. For him to come out with a 10, the all-time combine RAS with numbers like a 4.33 40, and I can tell you from his reaction to that 4.33, that had to have been the best run of his life. He knows that was a life-changing number. Absolutely rocked up. I mean, this guy is so well built. His numbers here putting him at 6'1", 223, running that kind of speed, 39-inch vertical, a 10.8 broad. It doesn't get any better than that. I mean, a 1.51 10-yard split. This is the best combine we've seen out of a running back ever. And he has 100% put himself in the running back 2 conversation. I understand People saying, no, that needs to go to Notre Dame's Jadarian Price. Totally understandable. But Washington's at the dance, and he set a floor with that athletic threshold. I just don't see this guy not being the third or fourth at worst taken off of the board. I'd throw it next to my guy in the group, and you're probably saying, well, by having Washington as your RB2 going into this, he's your guy, and that's worth mentioning too. Adam Randall out of Clemson. I mean, I went into this event with him as my RB5. Having interviewed him at the Senior Bowl, I can't believe he's only 232 pounds. I mean, built rock solid, former receiver. You're talking about a guy that came into the year, multiple hundred career receiving yards in his 3 years as a receiver. Comes in this year has 1,000+ scrimmage yards, running and receiving the ball. Close to a 10-yard per catch average. Had a 5 yards per carry average. For him to come test a 9.42 RAS at that size, I mean, 6'3", 232, and he's every bit of it. He is every bit of it. 37-inch vert. That 4.5 was a fantastic time, and we can't get desensitized to guys running a 4.5 because we're seeing these 4.3 and better on numbers. A 4.5 at 6'3", 232, with his receiving skills out of the backfield and his experience there, I just think media is way too low on this guy. I think the potential is there. He and Washington absolutely floored me, backing up, a strong claim that I had for each going into it. And then I'd wrap that one up, kind of like I said, similarly to Sawyer Robertson, somebody that was a little more surprised, and was really happy to see Seth McGowan out of Kentucky go put a 9.63 RAS. 6 feet tall, 223 pounds, a 42.5-inch vert, otherworldly, a 10.11 broad, and a 4.48 as far as the 40. Heard that for him to be somebody that does have a past arrest that he years ago has gotten a lot more maturity and grown from, that was kind of the buzz coming out as well, was that he just nailed it as far as all the interviews. Teams were loving his personality, his ownership and accountability. So I think when you combine that with what he did on the field, this was as promising and worth mentioning as the other two that I had. And at the receivers, you got to start off with another 10 RAS, the best receiver combine we've ever seen. Out of Cincinnati's Jeff Caldwell. If you looked at the consensus board going into this week, Caldwell was the undrafted free agent. That is, I think we can flush that at this point. 6'5", 212, 42-inch vertical, 11.2 broad, a 4.31 in the 40 at that size, with 32, nearly 33-inch arms. Even if there's work to do there, those athletic traits are too good to pass up on. In a receiver class where there is a lot of depth, that's standout material. Bryce Lance can't be over. That's one crazy thing too about a lot of these is we're sitting here talking about a second and third place guy that in most any year would be the topic of the day. Bryce Lance out of North Dakota State had a 9.99 RAS, real lengthy at 6'3", 204, 41.5-inch vert, 11.1 broad, and a 4.3, 440. That's as good as you're most of the time ever going to see. There's a little bit of age concern there. I do not have a hammered down birth date on Bryce Lance, but he's somebody in the depth of this class that's a different archetype of receiver with his size. For perspective, in terms of his testing specifically, almost a clone to Christian Watson out of the Green Bay Packers, a former North Dakota State receiver. So some good perspective there. But that was really exciting to see him come out. The one that I would have to claim for the receivers, kind of like I said, Sawyer Robertson, kind of like I said, Seth McGowan, the one that showed me something I did not understand was DeJon Stribling out of Ole Miss. And was I high on Stribling from the tape? Yes. Did I know he had long speed, like going out and running a 4.36? No, I did not. That's one to look back on. I think there's been some criticism about him being a little more sudden than speedy vertically. You shut that down. 6'2", 207, a 10.7 broad to go with it, finishing at a 9.88 RAS. In terms of the production, I'll tell you too, and not that this is as much combine relevant, but Stribling can block his ass off. I mean, this is a complete receiver. That's somebody that wants someone ready to roll day one. I mean, if you look at him collegially, he's got about 50 starts. He's as prepared for the league and ready to roll day one as anybody in this class. And going and then adding these kind of athletic thresholds met, he made himself some serious money. And I think maybe the most satisfying for people might have been Ted Hurst, out of my neck of the woods here at Georgia State wide receiver. You know, hanging a 9.92 RAS. While we know that he's kind of a George Pickens style receiver, really athletic at the catch point, going to have a high yards per catch. He's always been in that 16, 17 range. Don't know that anyone knew he was going to have 4.42 long speed. That was really a money maker there as well. Love to mention Hurst, having had so much buzz at the Senior Bowl. I've said previously that if I had to pick one person who might have been the hardest interview to obtain in Mobile from popularity, it was Ted Hurst. Did I get an interview with Ted Hurst? Yes. Was it nearly walking up the stairs to go back to the concourse? Yes. And then lastly, as far as the receivers, and another one that is a name that I feel like I've been talking about for 3 draft cycles, in J. Michael Sturdivant out of Florida, UCLA transfer. Had been a lot of talk this week that he was going to run for real. I mean, he ran a 4.4, really strong as far as a 10.11 broad, 39-inch vertical, and all this at 6'3", 207. For him to have a 9.96, that's maybe not as much sleeper now, but definitely value. This is going to be a player on day 3 that, the main theme, motto, creed, whatever you want to call it, of day 3 of the draft being betting on traits. This is the definition of it with Sturdivant, a guy that's played a lot of football. Was thrilled to see that one. And as far as skill players, wrapping it up, before we go to the offensive line, tight ends, I think you could probably guess who we're talking about here. Starting with Eli Stowers, tight end out of Vanderbilt. Yes, he's 6'3" and 6'8", 239 pounds. Yes, a little bit more of the modern tight end versus that traditional 6'6", 250 plus we grew up on. Yes, but for a motion tight end with such athletic ability, former New Mexico State, former New Mexico State quarterback before transferring and switching to tight end, a 45.5-inch vertical. I think we as consumers, and even if you do have an athletic background to have vertical testing experience, don't fathom just how freaky that is. For that to be a 9.99 RAS, he missed. It was a combine record. There is a pro day of 46 years ago. But just to say, nobody does that. And then 11.3 broad being the combine record. This guy has explosiveness, otherworldly. This guy has just overall athletic burst. And then you throw it over a 4.51. Don't care what position you play. 4.51's good, and particularly at 239, 240 pounds. I don't see Stowers getting out of the second round at this point. He put himself firmly in that tight end 2 conversation. I think there's a floor of tight end 3. Somebody that really made some real moves. And then you got to throw it immediately over to, though Kenyon Sadiq has been all but the unanimous tight end 1 across media, and I imagine across league circles, for him to himself go set the tight end combine record at 4.39. I mean, for further perspective, we're talking about taking over a record of a common comp for him in the 49ers, Vernon Davis running a 4.4. Yes, is he at 6, just a hair over 6'3", 241? Yes, but that goes back to affirming, like I mentioned earlier in the video, we knew those were the measurables we were looking at there. We knew that he's more of the modern tight end. And look, the blocking ability is fine. Do I think it's elite? No, but it doesn't have to be. It's not supposed to, particularly with these kind of athletic thresholds. I mean, you're talking to about a 43.5-inch vert and 11.2 broad. I mean, talk about somebody that came in there and thought he was going to be setting records with that, only for Stowers to go outdo it. Outdo it, that sounded like a mouthful, but, you know, you get the point. You know, and then you got to throw it over to, you know, where everyone's talking about these two, and justly so. But in terms of the RAS, they weren't even the top performer of the tight end group as a whole. That was Sam Roush out of Stanford with a 9.99. 6'6", 267. Back to that traditional tight end thresholds in terms of size that we grew up on. But I mean, a 38.5 inch vert, 10.6 broad, and throwing over with a 4.7. His was more just balanced across the board of that upper echelon of testing. Did come in with a small arm length at just over 30.5. You know, that kind of made the Twitter community get to run with it with some meme material. With that kind of athletic ability, and look, he's a strong blocker. I mean, it's not been an issue for him. You know, in a way, even over those two, particularly considering they were more at the top of consensus, top of boards, he probably made the most money for himself out of those guys. And then lastly, I would wrap it up with a little bit more of the surprise, like I've said with the Sawyer Robertson, like I've said with the Seth McGowan, like I've said with the Jason Stribling. And I got to go with Eli Raridan out of Notre Dame. And Raridan's one I admittedly, my initial summer scouting watch, I had to go back because I just was lower than everybody else, and I had to catch up a little bit. In my opinion, I mean, a 9.81 was incredibly strong, particularly the 4.62 on him in the 40. You know, you see him with a lot of that boxing out, you know, seam threat, catch radius, 36-inch vert, 10.3 broad at 6'6", 245, a little closer to that traditional size. You know, there will be teams that will have to take note of him having 2 ACL injuries in his past, one being in high school, but he just went and ran numbers like that and tested to show you that athletically and in terms of his health, he's right where you want to be and some. So Raridan was really worth mentioning. And as far as positionally, you know, kicking it to the offensive lineman here, this is really where I had the most volume as far as this episode and the numbers in it. But those guys just really showed out on the last day. I mean, the offensive line day of the combine is my personal favorite. And there was a reason for it today. You know, you could start with Caleb Lomu out of Utah. Lomu is somebody that coming out of summer scouting was probably my OT1 for what I had seen, you know, closer to the prototype size, 6'6", 313, which was a great weight for him. You're talking about Lomu as a redshirt sophomore who signed with Utah at 260. So, I mean, an incredible body transformation in a short time. You wonder if there's a little more there. Was listed this year at 304 or 305, so that 313 number was great for him. His movement skills in the on-field drill portion were just evident. The athleticism on the guy runs very light on his feet, but in terms of the testing, 32.5-inch vertical, hit that size, was unreal, a 9.5 broad, and then just cracked 5 seconds in the 40. I think Lomu, for what would consensus would probably have as a late 1, early 2, he gave every reason, particularly with, you know, his closer to prototype size, and he had every bit of 33+ inch arms to have himself in that conversation where I think he belongs. You know, and then you got to throw it real quick over to Monroe Freeland. Freeling entered the event as my OT1, even over Francis Mauigoa, even over Spencer Fanow, just because you're never going to once hear this conversation of, oh, should he kick inside? He's 6'7 plus, 315 pounds, redshirt sophomore, you know, similar to Lomu, signed with Georgia from my neck of the woods at 270 out of the state of South Carolina. Real mean in the run game, all the intangibles you'd look for. But I mean, as far as the testing, 33.5-inch vert, 9.7 broad, and a 4.95. I believe he did actually get 4.93. Looking at my notes, I think I need a correction. But I mean, the most impressive is you're talking about 34 3/4 inch arms. A guy that, while he'll be drafted to be a left tackle, has over 200+ right tackle snaps in his time in Athens for it just to be 2 seasons of playing. No, he's got 16 starts. but plays in a program he's practicing against NFL players every day. I do not see a world where he's fallen out of the top 15, 16, 17 picks. And I say 17 as an extreme floor. I think he's gotten himself in that conversation as high as 6. But money was definitely made today. I think in terms of some of the field work, you could see some of his wide base that's got to get tightened up in terms of him kind of losing his footing a little bit. But that's minor. In terms of an NFL offensive line coach looking at these tools and saying, oh, yeah, I can work with that, particularly at his youth. I mean, this guy's not even 21 years old yet. Haven't already mentioned Spencer Fanow. 9.76 RAS, a 4.91 40. His ability and the on-field drills, to see how light he is on his feet, to see the way he moves, the fact that after the drills he stayed back and took center snaps to show even more of that versatility that, yeah, you can kick him inside should you decide to do so from a right tackle spot. I think he hushed a lot of people. And, his size, 6'5" and a half, 311 pounds, it's plenty. Yes, did he come in at just a hair over 32-inch arms? Yes, but we knew that. That was affirming something we already knew. You don't count twice a negative on somebody's grade. I thought Fanow had a really good day. Blake Miller out of Clemson's the other one. Sticking out my chest a little bit. I have had Miller as a late one for months now. Talking about somebody, 54 career starts at Clemson, never missed a game, hardly if ever missed a snap. The durability, the day one readiness for someone, particularly, look at the end of round 1, look at the Rams at 29, look at the Patriots at 31. This is everything you could hope for. A 9.94 RAS, that prototype size at just a hair under 6'7", 317 pounds, 32-inch vert, just a tick over 5 seconds in the 40. You saw in the on-field drills his lateral ability. Miller made himself some money. He established a floor, and I don't know as much as in league circles, but across media boards and things of the like, he definitely raised his stock. He opened a lot of eyes to people that maybe had to take another look from what he did. And then super quick, I'd say 2 lesser known names, particularly for people really starting to dig into the draft here around combine time as we get here into the last stretch and heading into pro day season. Diego Pounds out of Ole Miss, a 9.5 at 6'6", 325. Really strong showing, a guy with nearly 34-inch arms. A lot of experience. And then Enrique Cruz Jr. out of Kansas, a 9.84, 35-inch vertical. I mean, that is that's 99th percentile in terms of what we've seen. And then ran a 4.94 with nearly 34-inch arms. Those, similar to what I said about like a J. Michael Sturdivant, of the definition of day 3 betting on high traits and taking somebody that you project to develop into a starter. Those were the 2 great examples out of this group. And excited to say this, kicking it over to the guards. Now lastly, looking at the interior, Michael Morris out of Georgia at a 9.99 RAS. I'll admit, lifelong Georgia guy. You can see me holding the Falcons colors here from the state of Georgia. I knew he was athletic. I didn't know he was that athletic. That's one that I even had to raise my hand and say, yeah, I was hyping him up coming into this week. I didn't know all that. Nearly 34-inch arms. The guy's literally built like a fire hydrant. 6'5" and a quarter, 334 pounds, nearly 10.5-inch hands. To go out there and have a 9.4 broad with that kind of size, that kind of wide body habitus, and crack a 5.1 in the 40. You talk about somebody you're looking at a gap blocking scheme and you just want to rain on somebody's head with a ton of experience from a program like Georgia. Micah, that is one I can say. It's not just media circles. NFL teams saw this, and I think for the most part, we're like myself, and we're like, we knew this guy was like that. We didn't know he was like that. Was thrilled to see that. Would real quick just mention Chase Basantis at a 9.93, and I do to say, I think in media circles, he's more thought of as that OG3 behind Vega and behind an Emmanuel Pregnon, I think every bit of this put it where it's like you can really have the conversation of him as the number 2 guard in this class. Talking about a former top 50 recruit, talking about a guy with a ton of experience at Texas A&M, real bully ball kind of player, strong, mean streak, explosiveness. I mean, a 32-inch vertical and the power in his lower body. This is the kind of guy you're looking at the Texans at the bottom of round 1. I think could be a surprise sneak. You look at the top of the second round for teams that need to build out and have some versatility. Take a Raiders, for example. He's going in the top 40 picks. He should. I'm very high on Basantis. And as far as the guards, lastly, you kind of mentioned Jalen Farmer out of Kentucky. He's the one of that position group that knocked my socks off at the Senior Bowl. Particularly, I know a lot of people today said they did not see this 4.93 speed he ran. I did. And statistically, ran just a hair over 17 miles an hour at the Senior Bowl. The second place guard there was just a hair over 16, third place just a hair over 14. So a gap in it in terms of being the best runner downfield to the second level and beyond. For him to have a 9.6 RAS at nearly 6'5", just a tick under, and 312, 34.25-inch arms. Oh yeah, Jalen Farmer did what I was not as surprised as many to see. And then lastly, wrapping it up, looking at the center group, which was thrilling. A couple of personal favorites with these last 3. Starting with Brian Parker II out of Duke. And I like the fact he's being classified as a center. Been a career tackle for the Blue Devils, but is projected to have that kick inside similar to Graham Barton out of Duke, former first-round pick of the Buccaneers. Do I think he is the freak of Graham Barton? No, but he did just go hang a 9.76 RAS. Hair over 6'5", 309, over a 9-inch broad. His biggest selling point just is that versatility. You're talking about somebody that was quoted as saying such at the Shrine Bowl, saying, I've told teams I can play all 5 positions. And I've said that he is the ultimate 5 tool in this class with his tackle experience. He was recruited to Duke as a center. There's definitely the comfort and showed at the Shrine Bowl of playing at guard. Similar, more strongly, but like I said about a Chase Basantis, for a team in particular that's got multiple offensive line needs, take Jim Harbaugh's Chargers, take the Vegas Raiders. How do you not look at this guy to come in and take a starting spot, but also if you say you have 2 centers and he's your starting center and you got a really good backup, but you got a weakness and you got a couple injuries at guard, you kick him over and you're ready to roll. That's his biggest selling point. I think he goes higher than media has thought at this point. Logan Jones was who I imagined was going to be the strongest tester of the center group and went out and backed it up. Kind of like I said earlier about J. Michael Sturdivant, not 3 years, but 2 years. Jones would have been my guy as far as the centers in the last class before he decided to go back to Iowa. Former Hawkeye defensive lineman who kicked over to center when Tyler Linderbaum headed to the NFL. Him at a 9.56 and just a hair under 6'3", 299, 32-inch vertical. And I knew he'd be the fastest runner of that group at a 4.9 flat. You're talking about somebody that can really get to the second level, and I think he's built for tough in terms of his strength, and you saw that today. I love the thought of him with somebody like a Tennessee Titans who've moved on from Lloyd Cushenberry and got a young quarterback and need that kind of athleticism to pair, say, next to a Peter Skoronski on an offensive line with a heavily paid Dan Moore and a young developing J.C. Latham. That's just kind of a mention I'd have out there that I did mention on a show this week. Was thrilled to see that. And the last person we'll be mentioning on this offensive segment, before I do a defensive one tomorrow, Jake Slaughter out of Florida. In terms of my interest in interviewing of the 15, 16, 17, whatever it was, interviews I did do in Mobile, gave me the best quote I had there in terms of his commenting on Falcons offensive line coach Bill Callahan. This guy is really intelligent, really smart, student of the offensive line, has played years, has all the starts of experience at Florida. For him to come get a 9.91, that's one that I knew he was athletic. I didn't quite know that. 5'1" in the 40, 32 and nearly 32 and a half inch arms. To go have a 32 and a half inch vertical, I didn't quite even know that, but it's 6'5", 303, which is what he was projected as. I'll tell you, as far as my Falcons, I think he's the best fit for what they do. A team that has been a wide zone for years, but with Bill Callahan coming into town, you can imagine there being more of a 50-50 split with a gap scheme. He's played both, ready to roll day one. Thrilled about that center group and what we saw from him wrapping up here at the NFL Combine. So 29 players in there, might have been a little bit heavier. We'll probably have a similar number in my next video talking about the defenders. But it's like every year we walk out of the Combine, and even in what is described as a lesser draft at the top end this year, it seems as though we're on Twitter all talking like there's 50 guys going in the first round, even though there's not. And this group kind of needed that. The buzz of this class needed that. And another great year coming out of Indianapolis.